Hello everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Justine Nolan. I'm the Director of the Australian Human Rights Institute here on campus and a Professor in the Faculty of Law and Justice. And I'm joined today by Andy.
Yeah, hi everyone, Andy Symington. So I'm an Associate of the Australian Human Rights Institute. I did a PhD with Justine here at UNSW a few years back, and I'm also Director of Human Rights and Social Impact at KPMG Australia, head up our mining and energy practice in that sphere.
So we're going to talk about a research project that we have been doing for about 2 years, and that is coming close to sort of having some real tangible outputs. And there's another collaborator with us who is Professor Dorothy Baumann-Pauly. She's at the University of Geneva at their Business and Human Rights Centre in the business school there, and the three of us work closely. And there are a number of other people involved in the project, and in particular Samuel Pride, who is sitting there, who is a researcher on the project as well. So any questions that come from Sam, just ignore, because it'll be something that he's setting us up for. So this project, in a nutshell, is sort of, we're talking about what does good business practice look like? And so our goal is to try and figure out where is business acting in a way that is having a really positive impact on human rights and environmental rights. So most of my career, I've looked at what business does wrong. So I spent a lot of my time looking at case studies where business has been involved in working in an apparel factory where there's been the death of hundreds of workers, or an extractive project where mining has destroyed the land and ruined the lives of the Indigenous communities around them. And so this project was very deliberately chosen and is funded by the Loudest Foundation to look at how do we develop case studies of where business practice is what we're calling transformative, so that they're sort of aligning profit with purpose and that we're getting evidence for how you can replicate these types of case studies. So our goal with this session today is we're going to give you a little bit of background on the interconnections between business and human rights and what types of things are happening in that field, and then we're going to showcase 3 of our 6 case studies that we're talking about today. So when we start to talk about the role of business and human rights, a lot of people go back to sort of the idea that companies really don't have any responsibility or anything to do with human rights. They're a profit-making entity, and human rights are sort of something that sits on the outside, and maybe it would be nice if they did it, but they don't have to do it. And some people go back to the sort of the famous statement of Milton Friedman, who was an award-winning Nobel Prize economist, who said that really the only responsibility of business is to use its resources to engage in activities designed to increase its profits. And then he said, well, staying within the rules of the game. So most people just look at his statement and say, well, companies are here to increase profits, and that's what we should do. But it's also, he had this statement of sort of staying within the rules of the game, and he was thinking about sort of the legal rules at the time in 1970. But from 1970 to now, the rules of the game and the expectations on companies have changed dramatically. And there's now a much stronger expectation on companies that they abide by social and economic and cultural rights and civil and political rights and environmental standards, both those in law and those that are adjacent to law. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Did you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, I just think there's been a kind of fundamental shift in societal expectations of business through that time as well. And so we see, I mean, there's a whole lot of sort of waffle in sustainability reports that companies put out, but the focus on those has changed dramatically. You know, like a BHP, probably 15 years ago, the sustainability report would have been 3 or 4 pages long. These days it's 50 to 70 pages, with human rights sort of mentioned 50 to 100 times. So that's kind of in response to this shift in societal expectations, which has come from consumers, which is coming from investors, which is coming from all sides basically, and so it's really changed the landscape for companies beyond what the law requires.
So one of the things that our project is focused on is looking at global supply chains, because they are basically the engine which is powering trade around the world. And what you find with global supply chains is that you often have well-known global brands at the top, at the apex of that chain, and then a lot of the impacts are right down the bottom of the chain. And there's all various what we call tiers of supply chains. And so a company, say if you're looking at a clothing company, a company like Nike, so it doesn't own and operate the factories in which its goods are produced. It basically uses suppliers. And so its direct suppliers, which are referred to as tier 1 suppliers, might be those types of factories that are in Taiwan, in India, Bangladesh, which are the finishing factories that are putting together the t-shirt, putting together the shoes. But then below that are all the lower tiers of the supply chain, right down to the sourcing of raw materials, then the idea is that a brand at the top should have transparency over its entire supply chain. So where the cotton is coming from, where the cobalt is coming from, where the lithium is coming from in Chile or in the DRC, right through to the distribution of that phone or the laptop to us. And so part of what our project is trying to do is looking at how companies trace supply chains and where you can have impact in it. So one of the aspect of a supply chain is that most of the price pressure is at the bottom of the chain. So if you look at the distribution of funding within a supply chain, the predominant amount of that is sort of reserved between sort of the distributor and the brand, and a lot of it goes to marketing. But if you look at this T-shirt, for example, and you look at the percentage that is going to workers of a $30 T-shirt, is usually in wages about 30 cents. The equivalent. And what we are also seeing is that those prices are not actually rising. So if the price of a T-shirt, 20 or 30 years ago was $12, you would expect that now to be triple that price. But in many cases, you can still buy that $12 T-shirt and sometimes the $5 T-shirt. So where the price crunch comes from is the pressure at the bottom on the factories and on the suppliers at the bottom of the supply chain. And so we're trying to look at practices, how you sort of think about a bit about value redistribution. So one of the most famous sort of, supply chains at the moment for fast fashion or ultra fast fashion is Shein. And so that is a company, obviously, that is really sort of moving fast and disrupting a lot of global supply chains in apparel in particular. So a company like Inditex, which owns Zara, one of the world's largest apparel companies, uses about 10,000 suppliers. Somewhere like Nike now has reduced their supply chain right down to about 1,000 more in terms of suppliers. So how many suppliers do you think someone like Shein has? If I gave you the variation between Nike and Inditex. Do you want to guess?
I was going to say probably 500,000. There's so many different.
Yeah, so the guess was around 500,000. The reality is we have no idea because a company like Shein releases no information on it. So where Andy talked about that idea, so we're guessing it's probably somewhere between 10 and 20,000. But Andy talked about the changing societal expectations on companies, and that has been very focused, particularly on brand-focused companies. But there are some companies now, particularly in ultra-fast fashion, like Temu and Shein, who are basically saying, we don't really care. And our consumers don't seem to care, so we're not releasing any information. There's more and more pressure coming on them, and we're seeing new laws emerge, which is demanding it. But there's this sort of, dichotomy of different ways that companies are reacting. So do you want to talk a little bit about conditions in supply chains?
Yeah, sure. I think, and the garment industry is a particular focus, and because we saw back in the 1990s, Nike, the sort of these allegations of sweatshops in South